It's 4:20 a.m. on the 18th of June 2025. In the South China Sea, 140 nautical miles southwest of Mischief Reef, the USS Gerald R. Ford carrier group suddenly picks up dozens of fast-rising radar tracks. Alarms punch through the ship. Red lights flood the passageways. Sailors grab helmets, slam hatches, and sprint to battle stations. On the flight deck, crews crouch behind tie-downs as the night sky flashes. Far off, thin orange needles fall toward the sea. Chinese DF-21D ballistic missiles and CJ-10 cruise missiles already inbound. The air smells of jet fuel and salt. Radios crackle. Weapons free. Aegis screens bloom with threat icons. Missiles are ranked by speed and angle, so the closest killers die first. On the bridge, the captain says one word: engage. Rails shudder as interceptors leap from the escorts. If the layers hold long, then medium, then close, the carrier lives. If one warhead punches through, steel tears, fire spreads, and the Navy's most advanced ship could vanish before sunrise. In the South China Sea, shipping lanes cut through one of the busiest highways on Earth. Every day, tankers and freighters move oil, grain, and semiconductors that keep stores stocked and factories running back home. The USS Gerald R. Ford carrier group patrols here to guard those lifelines and steady partners who live within missile range of disputed reefs. The job looks simple, but it's brutal. Keep sea lanes open while a rival probes every scene. Tonight, that rival is China's PLA, firing DF-21D anti-ship missiles and CJ-10 cruise missiles from H-6 Kelvin's bombers. This patch of ocean, 140 nautical miles southwest of Mischief Reef, is where one wrong call could shake global prices in days. For the crew, the stakes are human first. If defenses fail, steel shatters and fire spreads in seconds. If a supercarrier goes down, it's not just a ship, it's a signal to every capital from Tokyo to Manila about who sets the rules. Insurance premiums rise, captains reroute vessels, freight costs climb, and the price of a phone, a car part, or a bag of rice ticks up for families far from this sea. Allies watch to see if Washington can still protect the commons. Rivals watch for hesitation. This night is also a test of economics. America built layered shields, Aegis destroyers, fighters on the roof, subs in the deep, each meant to swat fast threats. But defenders spend billions to beat cheaper missiles, and that math favors the attacker. The question is endurance. Can the carrier group hold the shield long enough to break the assault, or does sheer volume land a kill? Drop a quick 1 or 9 in the comments. US carriers hold the line, or Beijing's missiles punch through, and if you want part 3, that single digit keeps you with us. 4:32 a.m. The first alerts fade into the rhythm of action. The Ford's escorts USS John Finn and USS Halsey light off their vertical launch cells. Dozens of SM-3 interceptors roar upward, streaking into the black sky to meet the incoming wave. Each shot is calculated to kill the most dangerous track, buying precious seconds for the carrier behind them. The radar picture looks like a storm, icons multiplying, splitting, then vanishing in bursts of static as hits register. The first few intercepts work. Bright flashes mark ballistic missiles detonating in the upper atmosphere. Yet the screen fills again, new salvos arcing over the horizon, cruise missiles hugging low over the waves. CJ-10 skim barely above the water, forcing defenders to track them against sea clutter. The destroyers switch to SM-6, optimized for low-flying threats. Flares bloom, then fade, as warheads vanish. But more survive. On the Ford's flight deck, F-35C pilots race to their cockpits. Cats launch in quick rhythm, afterburners glowing. Fighters climb to meet bombers still circling hundreds of miles out. Their job, thin the herd before more missiles leave Chinese wings. Within minutes, the first intercepts hit home stealth jets, slash into H-6 Kelvin's formations, firing AMRAAMs that drop bombers before they can release a second load. Meanwhile, deep underwater, the fast attack subs USS Illinois and USS Missouri slide into firing position. Their tubes launch Tomahawk counterstrikes toward radar stations on Hainan and missile sites along the coast. Each launch is a message. Attacks won't go unanswered. Explosions ripple across the Chinese mainland as command centers and storage bunkers ignite. Back near the carrier, chaos narrows. A few DF-21D survive long enough to dive steeply toward the fleet. SM-6 rise to meet them. One explodes high, but another dives through the net. The warhead detonates close aboard. A thunderclap shaking the fort. Shrapnel rakes the hull, injuring sailors topside, but the armor holds. No ship is lost. The defense bends but does not break. By 5:10 a.m., more than 50 missiles have been fired and 50 have been stopped. The surface of the sea glows with wreckage, debris floating in burning slicks. Smoke trails crisscross the dawn sky. Sailors breathe, but only for a heartbeat. Everyone knows this was just the first round. 5:40 a.m. The second wave comes in lower, faster, and meaner. Several Chinese drones and cruise missiles slip past the first curtain of defenses. The destroyers fire again, launchers glowing as SM-2 leaps skyward. But the radar picture stays crowded. The crew feels the tempo quicken. The enemy isn't just testing, they're pressing. Ford adjusts course by a few degrees, shrinking its silhouette against the swarm. The move tightens angles for defense, less broadside, more narrow target. Guns across the escorts come alive. Phalanx systems spitting tracers into the sky. Some missiles break apart in orange blossoms. Others keep driving straight. High overhead, a Hawkeye spins, pushing new bearings to every console. Decoys bloom chaff, flares, and Nulka rockets dragging seekers wide while CRAM crews guard the last 100 yards. On the bridge, tension is measured in heartbeats. Sailors call out impact times, counting down in seconds. The captain's voice cuts through. Stay on it. The sea fills with explosions, water plumes shooting high as near misses slam in. The ship rides shockwaves, steel groaning with each hit nearby. Damage control teams stand ready with hoses and patch kits. Inside CIC, operators fight the clock. Jammers pour noise into seeker bands. SPY-1 arrays shift modes to hold low flyers against clutter. Track managers hand off targets in sequence, avoiding gaps. Link 1-6 chatters, welding escorts, fighters, and the Hawkeye into one picture. Every clean handoff saves a missile for the next threat. Above, FA-18E race to cut off leakers. Pilots dive, dropping bombs on drones, skimming the waves. Each success buys the carrier another breath. Each miss brings the enemy closer. The crew knows. If even one warhead hits, the mission unravels. Magazines aren't bottomless. Every intercept burns money and minutes. Yet the defense holds. Layer after layer, the shield bends but does not break. Still, the sailors see it. China will spend missile after missile, drone after drone to land one strike. And that raises the question for everyone watching. Which side runs out first, America's defenses or Beijing's arsenal? If you think the US keeps holding, hit 1-inch the comments. If you believe sheer volume will break through, hit 9 and make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss part 5 when the twist arrives. 6:15 a.m. Just as the Ford sailors think the storm is easing, the picture changes. Radar picks up dozens of new contacts, smaller, faster, and hugging the surface. These aren't the big ballistic arcs or lumbering cruise missiles. They're sea-skimming drones packed with explosives, launched in swarms from disguised fishing vessels and low-flying bombers. Harder to see, harder to kill. The crew realizes the shift instantly. Ballistic interceptors won't help here. These threats are coming in under the radar horizon, popping up with only seconds to spare. The captain orders close-range defenses to full alert. Phalanx CIWS turrets spin. CRAM crews grip triggers, and every lookout is told. Eyes on the water. The first swarm arrives fast. Tiny silhouettes skim the waves, weaving unpredictably. Gunners open up, tracers slashing the dawn. Some drones burst apart, spraying metal shards into the sea. Others press forward, forcing last-ditch intercepts. The ship jerks hard to port, maneuvering to spoil incoming tracks. Every second counts. Above, F-35C drop low, using cannons and smart bombs to thin the pack. One pilot radios. Too many, too low. The fight shifts from long-range intercepts to a knife fight on the water's edge. Damage control teams brace, knowing even a single drone detonation on the hull could cripple systems. The twist is clear. China isn't just throwing missiles. They're layering weapons, long-range killers, then swarms of cheap expendables designed to saturate defenses. It's a brutal math problem. For every billion-dollar carrier, the other side spends pennies on drones. The US must adapt or risk bleeding resources dry. 6:45 a.m. The last wave closes in. Dozens of sea-skimming drones, the survivors of earlier barrages, dart straight at the fort's formation. There's no time left for long-range missiles. This is point-blank combat. CIWS mounts thunder, spitting streams of depleted uranium rounds. Tracers carve across the sky, stitching the dawn with lines of fire. One drone erupts in a fireball, another slams into the sea, but more weave through. The ship shudders under violent maneuvers, spray covering the bow as steel grinds against the waves. Inside CIC, every console screams with warnings. Operators juggle dozens of inbound tracks, shifting targets in split seconds. CRAM batteries launch, trails curling low across the water before detonating against fast-moving shapes. The noise is deafening, the pace relentless. On deck, sailors duck behind cover as gunners keep their barrels hot. One drone explodes so close that shrapnel rains across the flight deck, tearing into parked equipment. Fire crews race forward, foam spraying to smother burning fragments. Yet the deck remains operational. Jets keep launching, climbing into the smoke-stained morning. Bridge teams switch some mounts to local control as sensors glaze with salt. Medics haul 2 injured sailors below. Both are conscious. EOD sweeps hot fragments off the deck to keep catapults clear. The battle turns chaotic. One drone makes it through, diving hard. A burst of tracers rips it apart barely 50 yards from the hull. The blast knocks sailors off their feet, the shockwave rattling bulkheads, but the carrier survives. Another drone slips into range, destroyed in a flash by a phalanx mount, firing its last belt of ammunition. Minutes stretch into eternity. Then, silence. The sky clears, smoke drifts, the horizon is empty. The Ford still floats, scarred but unbroken. Its escorts circle tight, their magazines nearly dry. Crews exhausted, but the line has held. The climax has shown both sides the truth. Technology, training, and raw willpower can hold back even overwhelming swarms, but only just. And that leaves the question for you. In a fight this close, who really wins? Drop a 1 if you think America's layered defense proves unbeatable, or a 9 if you believe sheer numbers will one day overwhelm it, and hit subscribe so you're here when the aftermath unfolds in part 7. 7:30 a.m. The smoke thins over the South China Sea. Wreckage drifts across the waves, shattered drones, burned out missile casings, and oil slicks reflecting the first light of day. The USS Gerald R. Ford still floats at the center of its formation, scarred but alive. Its escorts circle close, some with empty launch cells, others with guns still hot to the touch. Sailors stagger from their stations, exhausted, yet knowing they've just fought the hardest battle of their lives. Result: the U.S. shield held. China's much-feared carrier killers failed to land a decisive blow. For Washington, it is proof that layered defenses work under fire. For Beijing, it is a painful reminder that strategy on paper can crumble against training, coordination, and relentless will. Billions of dollars in missiles and aircraft are gone in hours, and with them much of the rocket force's regional punch. But the cost is real. U.S. magazines are nearly drained, crews are stretched thin, and every intercept fired tonight will take months and millions to replace. The battle shows a brutal truth. Defense works, but it's expensive. Offense can be cheap, relentless, and disposable. That equation will shape every clash to come. Allies in Tokyo, Manila, and Canberra watch closely. Confidence in American resolve surges, but so does awareness of the price. NATO even issues a rare statement of support in the Pacific, a sign that this fight echoes far beyond these waters. At the same time, Beijing faces the blow of losing prestige. The carrier killer myth cracked in public view. Tonight, the carrier group held fast, The sea lanes stay open, but the rivalry is sharpened. And that leaves one last question. When the next wave comes double the drones, backed by shore-based missiles, who bends first? Drop a 1 if you believe America can still hold the line, or a 9 if you think Beijing will learn, adapt, and overwhelm. Either way, subscribe now so you don't miss the next episode when the conflict escalates. At 5:59 a.m. on May 14, 2025, the still waters of the Taiwan Strait rippled with the wake of a single warship. The USS John Paul Jones, an American-guided missile destroyer, had just powered up her automatic identification system, a deliberate signal, a flare in the dark that announced to everyone who was watching, "We are here." For any other stretch of ocean, it would have been routine. But here, in one of the most contested waterways on Earth, it was something closer to defiance. Like walking into the toughest bar in town wearing the rival gang's colors, the message was clear. The US Navy wasn't hiding. It was daring. 50 miles away, inside a Chinese coastal airbase, the morning silence cracked. A radar operator leaned forward as his scope lit up. Within seconds, the phone was in his hand and alarms began to wail across the tarmac. Two J-16 fighter pilots, still midway through their breakfast, abandoned their trays and sprinted for the hangars. Today was no ordinary day. In Beijing, it was Naval Glory Day, a celebration of sea power and national pride. For Chinese commanders, the sudden appearance of an American destroyer in the strait wasn't just an intrusion, it was an insult. By the time the J-16 pilots reached their jets, ground crews were already locking in weapons, PL-10 heat seekers and PL-15 radar-guided missiles. The fighters weren't taking off just to patrol. They were launching to make a point. On the bridge of the John Paul Jones, the captain already knew what was coming. His crew watched the sun rise over a deceptively calm sea, their destroyer slicing through the water at a steady 18 knots. Yet behind the calm, the tension was electric. The rules of engagement were strict defensive fire only, unless attacked first. But the men and women aboard understood. The next few hours could decide more than their fate. They could decide the course of nations. At 6:05 a.m., the stillness shattered. Twin J-16 fighters roared skyward, their afterburners carving fire across the dawn. In less than 2 minutes, they had climbed through 12,000 feet, radars warming, missiles armed, hydraulic systems green. These weren't patrol birds, they were hunters. In the Combat Information Center of the John Paul Jones, the Aegis system painted the tactical picture with cold precision. Merchant ships, fishing boats, a passenger jet en route to Taipei, and two fast-moving blips closing straight for them. The CIC crew didn't need words. Everyone knew what those tracks meant. The J-16 second weren't broadcasting their positions. Instead, their AESA radars, nicknamed the Ghost, quietly locked onto the destroyer. 1 second, the ship was just another silhouette on the horizon. The next, she was glowing bright inside the pilot's helmet displays. On board the American destroyer, electronic warfare sensors lit up. New emissions, X-band, pulse signatures, military, one operator called out. Recorders whirred to life, capturing every spike, every wavelength. The sailors weren't just watching, they were cataloging, documenting, building a library of everything the Chinese jets revealed. By 6:12 a.m., the lead pilot inverted his fighter at 18,000 feet, then rolled nose down in a high-speed dive. His target, empty ocean, exactly where his radar told him the destroyer was cutting through the waves. At 500 feet, he leveled off, screaming in at more than 450 knots. Every move choreographed, every detail a demonstration. We can hit you before you react. Inside the CIC, sailors exchanged quick glances, their screens showing the range collapsing fast. Every weapon system was armed in software, but still cold. The rules were clear, no shots unless fired upon. But the reality was brutal. At this speed and altitude, one mistake could end in fire, steel, and war. On deck, the roar of the jet was deafening. Crew members gripped railings as the fighter tore past, the shockwaves slamming into sensors and rattling the mast. It wasn't an attack, not officially. It was a message, painted across the sky in raw intimidation. We own this airspace. What will you do about it? The first pass was only the opening move. At 6:20 a.m., the two J-16 seconds slid outward and then inward again, settling into a textbook bracket. One fighter shadowed the destroyer's port quarter, the other mirrored starboard, their angles converging like pincers. From the American scope, it looked less like a flight pattern and more like a vice tightening by the second. Inside the CIC, the Aegis plots updated with metronomic calm. Headings, airspeeds, closure rates, predicted turn radii. Calm on the screen, heat in the room. Everyone understood the subtext. If the US ship committed a hard lock on one jet, the other would gain a clean lane to threaten, photograph, or launch. Electronic warfare added a second front. The wingman toggled his radar into sea search, strobes sweeping the hull every 2 seconds. The lead fighter lit a KG-800 pod and poured noise into the spectrum, a smear of interference designed to blind fire control at the worst moment. On the spectrum analyzer, red spikes climbed like a heartbeat heading for crisis. Operators filtered, tagged, and recorded. The order held. Catalog. Everything escalate. Nothing. The lead pilot dropped again, combing the wave tops at 300 feet, then 250, trimming with featherlight inputs. At that altitude, the ocean is not scenery, it is a wall rushing past. A fractional pitch error becomes catastrophe. Yet he held a surgeon's line, crossing the bow offset for a perfect camera angle. HUD bristling with range gates and closure cues. On the bridge, the captain watched the sea and his people. He could arm missiles with a word. He could freeze the sky with a radiating lock that said, "Turn away." But every signal carried meaning, and meaning could be misread. The hardest thing to do in a fight is nothing, and do it perfectly. Then came the thump of speed. The starboard J-16 dived shallow and went transonic. Shockwave rolling over the superstructure like a physical shove. Windows rattled. Coffee leapt. Sailors clenched railings but held posture. In the CIC, someone exhaled a laugh that wasn't humor, just adrenaline baking off. The bracket tightened. Port fighter widened his arc, then knifed inward to squeeze geometry. If they carried YJ-83 second, they were already within plausible launch. The Aegis computer drew silent solutions. Which cells to wake? Which bearings guaranteed a kill? Which phasing minimized debris over friendly decks? Numbers were easy. Politics was not. Jamming spiked again. The destroyer's SLQ-32 answered with countermeasures, filters, deceptive returns, a shifting sandbar of false echoes. It was a chess match played at 450 knots, every move a dare. Show me your doctrine, I'll show you mine. Still, the captain refused the easy theater of rage. No warning shots, no lock beams. He let professionalism do what anger could not hold the line. The crew felt the decision like a load shared across 1,000 shoulders. Fear was present, but discipline was louder. When the starboard jet hauled vertical, the port wingman slid low across the wake, vapor pluming from his wingtips, canopy flashing like a blade. For a heartbeat, steel and jet were the only things that existed: the sea, the sky, and a choice. The destroyer kept course. The Americans documented everything, and the bracket, having proved its point, did not break the world yet. At 6:47 a.m., the horizon shimmered with something far more dangerous than fighters. A new contact bloomed on Aegis. Bigger, slower, undeniable. CIC operators didn't need to check the ID tables. The radar pulse signature was as distinct as a fingerprint. A Type 052D guided missile destroyer, Beijing's crown jewel. And it was closing fast. If the J-16 second were harassment, the 052D was escalation. Its Type 346 ampere phased array radar, notorious among U.S. crews, locked onto the John Paul Jones with the steady, confident hum of a predator. Within moments, the American destroyer was no longer just tracked. She was targeted. Almost on cue, 2 more J-16 seconds surged in from the mainland. Fresh fuel, fresh pilots, fresh aggression. They didn't circle cautiously like their predecessors. They came in hot, low, fast, impatient. The lead fighter dove to 200 feet, so close to the surface that sea spray misted across his canopy. At that height, the American destroyer filled every inch of his heads-up display. His wingman chose a riskier line. Instead of trailing the ship, he crossed the bow at barely 400 feet, afterburners igniting in a roar that drowned out bridge comms. The shockwave slammed into steel, rattling the mast, jarring bolts, making every sailor on deck feel the vibration in their chest. It wasn't just intimidation, it was a demonstration. You are boxed in, and boxed in they were. The J-16 second above, the destroyer ahead, sonar whispering of submarines below. The triangle of pressure was complete. Every move the Americans might make was mirrored by a counter. Every path of escape narrowed by design. In the CIC, displays glowed like a storm front. Airborne radars sweeping, jammers hissing, missile signatures probed and analyzed. The combat computer calculated timelines in brutal precision. At this range, if the O-52D fired YJ-18 anti-ship missiles, impact would come in less than 90 seconds. If the J-16 second loosed their payloads, the timeline was even shorter. The tactical action officer hovered over the fire inhibit switch. 1,000 tons of steel and circuits stood ready. VLS cells packed with SM-2 second and ESSMs. CIWS mounts primed to spit tungsten walls. Everything was alive, but restrained. On deck, sailors braced against the salt wind, eyes fixed skyward as the fighters screamed overhead in alternating passes. Each roar louder than the last, each maneuver tighter, riskier, designed to drag nerves across raw edges. The crew didn't flinch. They couldn't. The captain had ordered calm, and calm was what they gave him, even as adrenaline burned through their veins. For the John Paul Jones, this was the knife's edge of naval diplomacy. To escalate meant war, to retreat meant humiliation. And so they held course straight, steady, deliberate. But everyone on board felt it. The margin for error was gone. One twitch, one flare, one nervous finger, and the strait would ignite. By 6:58 a.m., the harassment had peaked. The J-16 second no longer flew to impress cameras or to rattle nerves. They flew to push the John Paul Jones into a corner she could not escape. One fighter dropped to an illegal altitude of just 120 feet, its wingtips carving vapor trails as it skimmed so close to the waves that spray fanned behind it. It thundered barely 200 feet off the destroyer's port beam. Every second a deliberate test of the American self-control. Simultaneously, another J-16 roared overhead at 300 feet, its radar locking solid onto the destroyer's hull. There was no pretense left. This wasn't observation, it was targeting. Ahead, the O-52D destroyer accelerated, white water boiling from her bow. She cut across the strait at 30 knots, completing the triangle with lethal geometry. Chinese warship ahead, fighters above, submarines lurking unseen below. The Americans were boxed inside a trap with no clean exit. In the CIC, the atmosphere thickened like storm air before a lightning strike. Alarms sang. The SLQ-32 filled the spectrum with hostile signatures. Both CIWS mounts spun up, Vulcan cannons whining as their barrels rotated into pre-fire RPM. Operators watched kill solutions stack on their screens. 17 simultaneous intercept paths, each one a clean shot, each one a potential trigger for catastrophe. The tactical action officer's hand hovered over the fire inhibit switch. He could feel the vibration of the cannons through the deck plates, the hum of missiles waiting in their launch cells. The Aegis computer whispered silent calculations: distance, closure, impact time. One click, one decision, and the next sound would not be alarms. It would be the thunder of missiles leaving their tubes. 5 seconds. That was all that stood between the Indo-Pacific and war. On deck, sailors felt it in their bones. Their destroyer was alive with energy, radars humming, guns primed, computers locked on, and still no order to fire. They looked skyward, eyes following the screaming fighters skimming the mast, knowing full well that if he loosed a missile at this range, there would be no second chances. The CIWS was their last wall, and its barrel spun like a growl waiting for a bite. Inside the cockpit of the lead J-16, green digits scrolled across the pilot's visor. range gates closing, firing solutions updating every fraction of a second. The temptation was there, the target fixed and glowing. He knew the Americans could kill him in a heartbeat, but only if they pulled the trigger first. And so he pushed closer, daring them, gambling with the silence of rules that chained both sides. 5 eternal seconds, then release. The J-16 second clawed skyward in vertical climbs, afterburners blazing. The O-52D eased her bow offline, throttling back into a shadowing posture. The trap dissolved as quickly as it had formed, leaving the John Paul Jones steaming forward, her engines steady, her crew wired with adrenaline and disbelief. They had survived. Not because their weapons failed, but because they never fired. As the sun climbed higher over the Taiwan Strait, the echoes of jet thunder faded into the distance. The Chinese destroyer no longer charged, but shadowed from afar, her bow angled just enough to remind the Americans that she was still there. Above, the J-16 second dwindled into specks of silver, their vapor trails dissolving into the morning sky. On board the John Paul Jones, the CIC quieted, but the tension lingered like static after a storm. Sailors removed their headsets with hands that trembled, not from fear, but from adrenaline refusing to fade. They had stood at the edge of war and had not crossed it, and that restraint had demanded more courage than any missile launch ever could. The captain sat in his chair, expression carved from stone, his silence heavier than any order. He knew what his crew had endured, 5 seconds in which history might have bent toward disaster. He also knew what they had achieved. The destroyer had sailed through, mission intact, without giving the enemy the excuse they had been baiting for. For every sailor, the lesson was unmistakable. In modern conflict, the first to fire may not be the victor. The true strength lies in control, in surviving the provocation without surrendering discipline. It is easy to unleash destruction. It takes far greater willpower to withhold it. As the John Paul Jones continued her transit at 18 knots, engine steady, wake trailing across contested waters, her message was written not in gunfire, but in resolve. We do not bend, and we do not break. The world would remember this standoff not for shots fired, but for the silence that held them back, and perhaps for the deeper truth it revealed. Sometimes the bravest warriors are not those who strike first, but those who refuse to.